it's going to go Democrat, which is, it's another seismic shift in the electoral map. And again, if Democrats are able to flip states like Georgia ahead of in this election, you're seeing an electoral map that's going to be permanently changed, and Republicans needing to do a great deal of work to rectify the damage that's been done to their voter base.
So voter suppression issues are rearing their head once again. No surprise there. We've seen some cases of Trump kind of saying, "Hey, you need to go sit out. My supporters need to go sit outside and watch these polling locations and try and make sure everything's legitimate." First of all, just saying right out there, that's voter intimidation. That is documented illegal. If you're doing that, that is a crime. You can go to jail. You can get fines for that. Is it really worth your time to do that? I'd ask yourself that. What is your message, Alex, in particular for people who are thinking of doing that kind of thing?
Don't do it. I mean, but they're not going to listen to us. We live in such a, you nailed it earlier in the broadcast. We live in a time that has become so partisan, necessarily because of the rhetoric of the president, who has, called his political opponents rioters and looters and radicals, and these kidnapping attempts on governors, Democratic governors, and his hyper-partisan alarmist language has led us to this place. So I don't have any hope that people who are supporters of the president, who believe that there's a satanic cabal of Democrats who are running to just, trying to destroy the world, that only Donald Trump can save them from. This is the necessary conclusion of that kind of propaganda and misinformation that's been pumped into our electorate for years because of Donald Trump and then his enablers. So when we talk about voter suppression, in 2016, I'll note that their tactic was to purge voters from voter rolls using this interstate cross-check system, which erroneously purged valid, legally registered voters from the voter rolls. They'd show up on election day to vote, and their names were not on the rolls, and they would have to cast provisional ballots, which were then not counted. 3 million legal ballots were not counted in 2016, and the Democrats lost the 2016 election by 77,000 votes in 3 states. So this time we're seeing attempts not only through this poll watching and poll challengers is the exact quote, but we're seeing an attempt through the courts to circumvent the will of the electorate through legal means, like not finding a distinction between ballots that are cast before 8 p.m. on November 3rd and then ballots that are counted after 8 p.m. on November 3rd, even though they're all ballots being cast as a part of the same electorate, the same voter pool. And so in my mind, there are active attempts happening through all kinds of means, and it's going to involve a huge voter turnout to be able to sort of make it impossible for them to circumvent the will of the electorate.
I do want to take a step back about your claim of that communication with those poll watchers. The QAnon people are radicalized, but radicalization comes from a distortion of a very real vulnerability, a very real concern. There are people who align with the president who are not there. We're not there yet. Is there what is the message to them? Saying what is the message to them?
To supporters of the president?
To supporters of the president who still can listen to reason with this stuff.
I'm not sure that Donald Trump has expanded his base I think that what we're seeing, at least I'm seeing maybe anecdotally, but across the board, is organizations like the Lincoln Project, or even at the Democratic National Convention this year, the number of establishment Republicans who have jumped ship. I think people of reasonable mind who are a part of the Republican Party, who see the threats to our democracy that are posed by this ongoing chaos, have jumped ship. I think there are people who align ideologically with certain Republican perspectives, like pro-choice voters, or excuse me, pro-life voters, who will vote Republican because they're single-issue voters who are willing to look past the other chaos and erosion of our democratic institutions and principles and norms because they really don't want abortion to be the law of the land. That's gonna be the case for them, and we can't change that. But for reasonably minded people who see the threat to our democracy being posed by this administration, I don't think that there's much work left to be done. I think that those voters may stay home or vote Democrat in this election. And if you support the president and don't see a problem with what we're seeing happen in his messaging and in his governance, I'm not sure that there's anything we can say to convince those voters. They've, like you said, that there's a hard level of indoctrination that's happened, and it's going to take many, many years probably to get back to a place where we have some normalcy in our government and a lot of undoing of harms that have been done. And so that's not a problem that's going to be solved overnight or in this election. It's going to take some time.
I will say this: if you do, if you are one of those voters, let the process, go in through the legitimate means of the process. Like, the process exists for a reason. It does not look like it's going to go in Trump's favor, but the process exists for a reason.
Yeah, but Andy, I'll note that some of those folks, they're on social media implying that there's no possible way that Democrats can win and that Democrats are going to, quote, find ballots after the election that will change the outcome. And so there's no scenario in which people who are diehards of the president will accept the outcome of the election, and they'll probably spin conspiracy theories for years to come about it. And we have to relinquish control over that, and people with reasonable minds who are in the majority, I believe, will need to just sort of continue forward and combat that messaging as it arises.
One of the things worth pointing out, a lot of political minds have said this, that there is a decent chance, if Biden takes the election, it will look earlier in the race that it will actually look more like a Trump election, as Republicans, more Democrats are voting by mail. The president knows that. He's been kind of systematically undermining that. What is your message right now for the voting public who sees this? What do you think that they should keep in mind when election night rolls around and the returns come in?
I was talking this morning on my own broadcast with Miranda Yaver. She's a political scientist, constitutional scholar. We discussed this very issue. And really, there's nowhere where it's written that election results are certified on election night. Election results are certified in late December. In the last election, it was December 19th. This year, it'll be December 19th or 20th. And until that time, that's the period in which we are tasked with making sure we have an accurate reflection of the vote. And every vote counts, and every vote should count, and every vote matters. And so I will wait to see what the vote totals are, no matter how long it takes. And nobody is under any illusion that this is a normal election. It's going to take time to count these ballots. And yes, the president is going to claim victory or try to on election night. I think there are scenarios in which Joe Biden has a commanding lead on election night too, because look at these early voting numbers. They're huge. And so there could be a scenario in which we have a determinative at least lead for Joe Biden on election night. But if it's even close, Donald Trump is going to claim victory and start to claim that the Democrats are trying to steal the election in the late count. And let's just hope that whatever the final outcome is, regardless of what the president and the Republican Party are spouting, what the final certified outcome is, if it is commanding, there is no way that anyone can circumvent the will of the people, whether it's through the courts, legal challenges. If it's a commanding lead for Joe Biden, whether we know on election night or 2 or 3 weeks after the election, there's nothing that can be done about it. So I'm encouraging people to vote early, and to vote in numbers that they can't deny.
We got a question earlier about Florida. There's a lot of talk that Trump needs to win Florida to even have a path to victory. Can you tell me about what's going on down there in terms of voter turnout for both parties right now?
Well, voter turnout in every state is huge. I think what we're seeing in Florida is there is a tight race, but Joe Biden has been polling ahead pretty consistently in terms of votes. About 7.8 million voters have voted early in Florida, and Democrats are holding an advantage in the early vote by a very slim margin, about 200,000, less than 200,000 votes. Democrats are leading in the early vote. But also note that there's 1.6 million no party affiliation voters who have voted. So that's going to be important in terms of which way it'll go. It's a swing state. It's going to be very close. But let's keep an eye on Florida. There is really very slim paths to victory for Donald Trump, especially if he doesn't win a state like Florida. But Joe Biden can lose Florida and still win in other states like Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. If he carries those three, the election's over, and all the polling suggests that he's ahead in all of those states.
Now, the one thing that I do want to address here, because this talking point about and this was a valid criticism in 2016, was about the nature of the accuracy of the polls. We'll see where that stands, come when the election, after the election is over. But the fact of the matter is the polls, and this is really kind of just some of my observations. That one of the reasons why the polling that existed kind of in the past here for why it was so wrong was because some of these Trump voters in 2016 didn't want to admit that they were voting for Trump. And then when he was elected, they were emboldened by the fact that he won, and they didn't have to hide that anymore. So this idea that there is this silent majority just seems a little far-fetched this time around. The other thing is, if you look at polling about the not the likability, but the unlikability of the candidates, where Hillary Clinton stood in 2016 was drastically different, worse than Joe Biden's, likability, dislikability. That's a pretty significant point to look at as well, is how much people do not like these people versus how many people actually like them.
Well, if I can counter to that, one of the reasons I got into journalism was in reaction to the 2016 election, because what is a point that a lot of people don't look at, because they kind of attribute those polls as being faulty, is that exit poll data show that Hillary Clinton won states like North Carolina, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, that she went on to lose in the computerized voter tallies. Now, this wasn't because the Russians hacked the voter rolls and changed the outcomes. This is because millions of voters were disenfranchised at the ballot box. They were purged from the rolls due to widespread Republican attempts to purge voters because they had similar last names or they moved down the street or what have you. And so legal voters were showing up to the ballots boxes. They were casting their votes for Hillary Clinton. They were leaving the ballot box and telling exit pollers that they voted for Hillary, which accounts for why she was winning, and she won those exit polls. And then the computerized tallies did not reflect that because provisional ballots are not counted. And when your name has been purged from a voter roll and you're no longer registered, they ask you to fill out a provisional ballot that's not counted. This is a major, major story that not a lot of people give credence to when they assess the outcome of the 2016 presidential election. Now, I'll note, while Joe Biden has higher favorability ratings than Hillary Clinton, that Hillary Clinton won more votes than any other presidential candidate in American history, second only to Barack Obama, whose 2012 total she effectively tied. So when we look at the outcome of that election, there are other interventionist forces at play that I think, if we're going to have a elections integrity in the United States, and I'll note our elections integrity ranks last in the Western of all Western democracies, that we have to take a look at attempts to suppress and disenfranchise votes. 200,000 African American voters were disenfranchised in Wisconsin, and Hillary Clinton lost that state by 40-something thousand votes. So voter suppression is real, it's active, and it takes large voter turnouts in order to right the ship of state.
Alex, thank you so much for joining us today. But before we go, I want you and all the viewers to take a look at something. So I was having a conversation with some friends of mine recently. We noticed that Joe Biden's smirks during debates look like something that you would see in like the opening sequence for a 90s or 80s sitcom. So we took the liberty of making that a reality with some video from the 2012 cycle, the debate between Paul Ryan. Put some music from some of our favorite 80s and 90s sitcoms. Take a look at this. One more. We got one.
No malarkey.
No malarkey. Anyways, we'll leave it at that for today. I'll see you right back here next Friday. Maybe we'll have a result for the election, maybe not. But we'll see you then. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.